Okay. So hi, Sarah. It's lovely, lovely, lovely to see you today. So could you just please start by introducing yourself?
Yes, so I'm Sarah Lewis. I'm a chartered organisational psychologist. I've worked with organisations since 1993 as a consultant, and before that, obviously, I worked in organisations, so I've kind of seen organisational life from both sides. These days, I work from a very strengths-based positive psychology, appreciative inquiry kind of orientation and approach. I work with organisations across the different domains, so public sector, private, commercial, not-for-profit. And I work at the individual, the team, and the organisational level. I also do some postgraduate lecturing, both in the UK and in the Far East. And I sometimes run internal workshops as well as working directly with organisations. Essentially, my focus is around change, and particularly positive change.
That's fantastic. And I know, I mean, you've got so much experience in this domain, and it really makes you one of the, I think, best practical, applied change psychologists around in this country and internationally. So I love your books, absolutely love your books. I love your teaching. I love how you convey the information. So I'm really very much admirative of your work.
Well, thank you very much. What can I say?
So yes, so basically, really, I wanted to have a chat about resilience today, because resilience is such a hot topic at the moment. It's not an abstract concept anymore. It's really something that each and every one of us really needs to sort of cross this situation, this moment of uncertainty, which might last for a while. So for you, what is your definition of resilience that really kind of makes sense in the current context?
I think it's quite interesting what we understand by resilience, and it's both about how we engage with difficult situations or unexpected disruptions or trauma, and also how we recover from them afterwards. And I think some of the most interesting things about resilience is it's about the resources that we have that we can draw on, how aware we are that we have them. This is really key. Some people don't realize all the resources that they have, so they can't access them. And then, of course, how we use them, if we use them kind of appropriately. So I don't know if you want me to talk about some of the different kinds of resources.
Please. Yes, please. Yes. Yeah. What do you mean by resources? What do you put into resilience resources?
Yeah, I think obviously from a positive psychology point of view, one of the key things we're talking about is our individual strengths, which, as you will know, are the kind of things that we can do very easily. They're integral to the way we engage with the world. They are energizing and confidence boosting. So accessing them and being able to think about how can I apply those strengths to this situation. But I think it goes beyond that as well into things like previous experience, knowledge that we have, our social networks, not only because our social networks boost our resourcefulness by sustaining and maintaining us, they also extend our resourcefulness because our contacts and our colleagues have access to other resources that maybe we don't. And so we're part of a kind of resource network, so we become more resourceful.
Yes. Yes, absolutely. It makes a lot of sense. And in your case, because you actually had quite a few different careers in your lifetime and actually changed different careers. So how did all your own personal and professional experience prepare you for what's happening right now? Because I think what's happening right now, it's also personally impactful.
Yes, I think you're very right. We have this saying, what doesn't kill you makes you stronger. Now that's not always true. We know there's more than one outcome from trauma, but I think there is something about as we go through life and we discover that we can cope with situations, we do develop a greater sense of our own self-efficacy and our own resilience. So some of the things for me in a professional life that have helped me have some of the kind of adaptability and flexibility, which are signs of resilience or part of resilience, was certainly when I was working many years ago now. I was working in a residential home for families with children at risk, So it's what they kind of called heavy end child protection. And there was a great change in all the funding arrangements, and essentially the whole organisation collapsed very quickly when I was temporarily in charge of it. It was highly traumatic having to close the establishment with, I can't remember quite how many families we had, but I would say between 15 and 20 families in the building, and 70 odd staff. And we had to find a safe way to move all these families on. We had to help staff. I had to persuade family staff to work, not knowing if they would be paid at the end, actually, so that we could get the families out safely, and so on and so forth. Now, it was very difficult, and then it was like, okay, so how am I going to earn a living? Because I was out of my ear as well. But there's those kind of experiences when you come through them and you pick yourself up and you can find a way forward, and sometime later, you know, life is good again, and you look back and think, well, I survived that. In fact, I learned a lot from it. That's how you build resilience. And that's one of the kind of big professional experiences that made a difference for me.
Yeah, thank you. And it's very much telling. Absolutely. And right now, what are you sort of personally relying on to stay strong in the face of all these multiple adversities, in fact?
Yeah, I would say the very first thing and the most important thing is, you know, counting one's blessings. In positive psychology terms, we talk about that as kind of, you know, the 3 good things exercise. But generally speaking, I feel so lucky that I'm in the situation that I am, where I'm living with someone who I not only can tolerate, but actually really like and love, you know, and we've been together a long time and so on and so forth. Yeah. You know, I have a garden. I'm not having to deal with small, bored children and all those other many, many blessings. That's probably the strongest one. Other than that, there's things like diverting your attention to things you can do rather than things you can't do. So there's various projects I've had in mind for a long time, never have time for. Now's the time. Some of those are intellectual, some of those are more crafty, more time for hobbies. I think a key thing for me as well, personally, is keeping a structure. So I like to keep my weekends separate from my weeks. So there's still a distinction. I have a sense of what I do in the morning, what I do in the afternoon, and what I do in the evening. So there's a structure to the day. I've something that's really nice that kills 2 birds with 1 stone is I have like a surrogate daughter who joined us later in life and is part of the family. And she is very kindly every morning doing an exercise class with me, the ubiquitous Joe Wicks exercise class.
Oh, excellent.
So I get the sociability of talking with my daughter, and also, of course, I actually get some exercise. So
that's fantastic.
Yeah, just things like that, really.
Yeah. And for others, what would you recommend? Kind of, we all know lots of psychological tools and interventions, of course, but what do you think are the most helpful ones for other people in general? So what would be your sort of recommendation?
Actually, I've just written an article called 10 Top Tips for Boosting Morale, which is hopefully going to be going out very soon. Very happy, obviously, to send you your own copy. And in it, I've put ideas and resources. So I've referred people to things like humour is very important. So there's a link to a particular YouTube that I find very interesting. Knowing your strengths. So we've got links to some of the strengths cards, including your own, obviously. And other resources like the positive action pack that you have, and I believe some other people do as well. Self-coaching cubes. So there's 10 different things around exercise, humor, counting your blessings, being appreciative, keeping up relationships. I can look it up. I can't remember the others offhand.
Yeah, perfect. No, thank you. And I would like to, if that's okay, to move now to organizations, because obviously you've got such a lot of experience in working with organizations, and many organizations will be facing quite tough times at the moment. So obviously, depending on what context they're in, there are some organizations that are doing well. There are some organizations that are completely closed right now. There are some organizations that are not sure if they would survive. I mean, what would you, instead of talking about resilience in organizations, what would you call a resilient organization? What are the particular features, perhaps, of resilience at an organizational level?
They have various things built into them, organizations that are able to display resilience. And one of them, actually, interestingly, is a certain amount of slack. There's a bit of slack in the system that allows for a little drop off in performance, or a little inefficiency for a while you find a new way forward. I think if we think at the moment, some of the shops that are doing better are those that have the wider aisles. And that is actually a bit of slack in the system, because in supermarkets, you want every square foot of floor to be selling something. So to have wide aisles is a little bit of slack. And on this particular instance, that's proving to be something that's allowed those stores to stay open and have more people going round, that kind of thing. Another thing that makes a difference for organization is having more than one way of doing something. So there's some flexibility. So again, if we look at the retail market, organizations that had bricks and mortar and online stores have got, again, that kind of variability built in. And when one isn't working, they can kind of shift resources over to the other. You see what I mean? And similarly, some of them who've managed to reconfigure their tooling, some of the engineering firms, so they can start producing what the world now wants. So that kind of being able to reconfigure your resources very quickly. Now, in terms of people in organizations, we are more able to reconfigure the way we use our people if we have good relationships in the first place, if we have good lines of communication, people trust each other.
Thank you. So what would we do then to build resilience in organizations? What are the main, again, tools, approaches, ways of building? Because obviously it's great if an organization is already resilient, but what if it's not really, or not yet, not completely, or somewhere in between? So what can we do?
Yes, they talk about, in the research, they talk about promotive and protective resilience. And some of this is factors that one has in place already that enable you to be resilient when something happens. And a lot of these we would think of as good HR or organizational practice. So it is the things like safe working practices, healthy workforce, good relationships, good communication. Obviously, I would say some of the things that tend to build that is knowing how to help people identify at an organizational level through using organizational wide development processes such as appreciative inquiry, open space, World Cafe. These dialogic whole system development processes mean that this is one of the things that makes a difference. People have a shared understanding of what they're trying to do. So the more you can get people to work by, we have a common set of aspirations or a common vision of where we're going or a common sense of aspiration, and we have some shared values, i.e. some common principles, then you can give people more flexibility in their area to find a way forward that is likely to be in line with what the organization wants to do. If an organization relies on command, control, micromanagement and has to tell everybody what they need to do when things change, that is really cumbersome. So people can do lots of things beforehand, and then now we need to kind of work on the missing bits. So we need to be really working on people understanding what the organization is trying to do, recognizing that people are not perfect listening organisms, that we only hear things when we're ready to hear them. So we have to say things more than once. I mean, the government's doing, actually here in the UK, a really good job of having a very simple message that everyone's got. And to some extent, organizations need to, and they repeat it regularly, and organizations need to be thinking about doing the same sort of thing, because people aren't listening terribly well necessarily. So creating common purpose, maintaining relationships, creating positive affect, finding ways to help people feel good. Because as you know, when we feel good, we are more able to be open to others, we're more sociable, we're more creative, we can deal with more complex information, all of the things, and we're definitely better at dealing with change, which the organization needs at the moment. And I think as well, having maybe being a bit more human you know, recognizing that other people are struggling and maybe confessing that so are we. I'm sure there's many leaders who are struggling with technology they've never had to use before. Okay, so we're all in this together. You know, let's just be a bit forgiving. Let's recognize that we're all learning, and, you know, I hope that's the sort of thing you were.
Yeah, absolutely. And we can always have a cup of tea over Zoom together, and even more than a cup of tea. So yeah.
Exactly. And even just what we're doing now, that synchronizing of gesture, laughter, facial expressions gives us that sense of connectedness, which a lot of people are feeling you know, quite isolated or lonely or stuck in front of their computer all day, depending on their circumstances. So it is these things that generate that sense of, yes, I'm still connected.
Yeah. Thank you. I think, yes, that's pretty comprehensive, in fact, as advice. And would you be able to to name some organizations that you consider particularly resilient in general? I mean, it's a tricky question. I know it's being outside of an organization. How can we tell, in a sense?
Yeah, well, I mean, it is tricky to see from the outside. I think, as far as I can tell, that some of the supermarkets have proved to be very resilient. The NHS is an enduring mystery to us all, how it keeps going on, you know, string and sticky plaster, but somehow it does, and it again is demonstrated terrific resilience and adaptability. Diversion of you know, resources and so on and so forth. When you were talking to me yesterday about all the things you've done in the last few weeks, I was astonished, and I would say that's a very resilient organization. Positran is a very resilient organization. There's a couple of other people.
We are.
Yeah.
We are actually.
Good. Practicing what we preach. And then there's other kind of smaller organizations I'm aware in the same place. I was thinking actually as well about the advertising world, where initially all the adverts you saw were totally out of date for what was going on, holidays and I don't know what. But now they've re-geared quite quickly and are producing adverts. Quite often, I believe, repurposing video they already have and adding in new voiceovers to have adverts that are much more, you know, relevant to what we're doing now. I think it might be worth noticing that resilience is not an absolute quality; it's an in-context quality. Yeah. So, so Amazon is proving also highly resilient at the moment, as are many other online. You know, however, had the catastrophe been that the internet disappeared from the world, it would be a different story. So resilience, is context specific. It's not something you have or don't have. Yes. And you can't really prepare for everything. So what you're aiming for is, how do we stay with some capacity to adapt, change, flex? Yes. Which takes me back to, you have to have some slack in the system to be able to do that, really.
Thank you. I think it's actually really, really insightful observation about the slack in the system. And looking back into my own organization, I think we would need a little bit more of that.
Well, that is the trouble. When things are going well, you just keep doing more of it, and you know, you don't need to have that, do you? You want to make it as efficient as possible. So yeah.
Exactly, because this is what actually allows this space to change. Yes. Very, very interesting. Thank you.
Pleasure.
Thank you. That was really a lovely conversation. So I'm very, very grateful for sparing some time to talk to me today.
It's been exciting. I've enjoyed it. Thank you very much. How many of these are you doing?
Thank you.
How many of these are you doing, Ilona?